Hello and welcome back. Before we get started, I do just want to say that I thought about delaying the release of this video, considering everything that's going on right now, as some people might think it a bit inappropriate, but I've gone ahead with it anyway, as it's really not meant to be topical. It's just stuff I'm making for my own games of D&D. So, as you can see, in this one, we're going to be making a few different coffins, and also things like the mummy, which we can place inside. And, as always, there'll be a link to the PDF file for these down in the description. So, yeah, let's make a start. Okay, for the main coffin shape, you'll see that there's two different textures. A darker one, which we can use for the bottom of the coffin, and a lighter one, which we'll use for the lid. And all I've done here is glue both textures to a piece of thick cardboard. The kind of thing that you might find on the back of a notepad. And for a sealed coffin, that's all you need to do. But if you're making one where the lid's fallen off, and you'll be able to see the back of the lid, then you'll also need to glue some of the plain wooden texture to the other side of that particular piece. Then all we'll need to do is cut those to size. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, for the sides, we'll take this texture here, and we're going to be gluing that to some thin corrugated cardboard. But before we can do that, we'll first need to make sure that the corrugation is running in this direction, and we'll also need to make sure that we use a side with a straight edge. Then we can simply apply some glue to the back of the texture, and then we'll wrap that over the edge of the cardboard. And the idea here is to have some of the texture on both sides, but at the same time, we're going to try and get the location marks that you can see here. We want those in the centre of the edge of the cardboard itself. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay then, here's a similar piece that's had a few minutes to dry, but before we go any further, I want to point out that only one side has these location marks here, and that's the side that we're interested in for this next part. So the first thing we'll need to do is cut away the excess from both ends. Like so. And then we're going to score a line down each of the location marks that I just pointed out. So, something like that. Next, we can trim the bottom edge to size, and bend the cardboard at each of the scored lines, and form it into the basic coffin shape. So this kind of thing. Right then, so here's all of the pieces that we just made, and the first thing that we're going to do with these is apply a small line of hot glue to one end of the side piece, and fix that into place. There we go, something like that. Okay, I found that the easiest way of doing this next part is to just apply a tiny blob of hot glue to each of the corners of the bottom piece, and then stick the side piece on top, doing our best to line up all of the edges as neatly as we can. And with any luck, that should result in something like this. Then you can either glue the top piece in place, or have it resting against the side, like you can see here. But if you do glue it into place, like this one, you can also add a couple of planks across the lid, just by gluing some of the wood texture to some similar cardboard, and cutting that into a thin strip. Alternatively, if you want something a bit more fancy, you can glue on an old bronze nameplate. And this is done just by gluing one of these textures to some thin cereal box style cardboard, and then cutting it to size. And that's pretty much it for the coffins, so let's move on to the next part. Okay, so before we move on to the mummies, I do just want to quickly remind you of the burial shrouds that we made back in bonus video number 10. And the reason for this is because, up until now, the texture for these, that's this one here, this texture, it used to appear in the modifications and requests PDF over on Google Drive. So rather than have it languish over there any longer, I thought it would be a good idea to include it with this latest PDF, as it's kind of all the same theme. Plus, in that video, I also showed you how to make these little humanoid shapes, so rather than going through all of that all over again, if you haven't already seen it, and if you're watching on YouTube, then there should be a link to the video up here somewhere. Okay, for the mummy, we'll first need to make one of those little humanoid shapes that I just mentioned, and we'll also need to cut out a piece of the bandage texture that's roughly 2 inches by 1 inch. Then we can scrunch up the paper a few times, just to make it more malleable, which is what you can see me doing here. Then we'll flatten it back out and apply plenty of glue to the reverse side. Next, we'll place the little figure in the centre of the texture and just roughly wrap the paper around the front and the sides, just to give us a rough idea of how much we'll need, so that we can cut away any excess. Like so. Now, for this next part, I found that making a couple of cuts in the paper, that helps with the process. So I'll make one cut down towards each shoulder area, and another one down towards the middle of the head. Then we can start folding in the sides, and I've left this running at normal speed so that you can see what I'm trying to do. And there we go. And now for the head. So I'll just trim away some of the excess again and start wrapping that around the head itself, like you can see here. And once that's done, we'll need to really squeeze the texture into the neck area to help emphasise the head. And here you can see that I'm also running my thumbs down the side of the chest piece, as that helps to give the impression of arms. Then we can do a similar thing with the legs and feet, so I'll start by adding a few cuts towards the ankles, like so. Then we can wrap the texture around the back of the legs. And there we go. Then I'll just cut away a bit more of the excess paper. And in this example, I could see that it was going to be a little easier to add an extra cut on either side of the feet. So I've gone ahead and done that as well. So there we go. And once the feet are nicely covered, we'll do a similar thing to the ankles as we did with the neck, just to give that area a bit more definition. And while I'm at it, I'll also go over everything one more time, just to make sure that it's all stuck down. And when we're done, this is how it should look. However, as you can see, the bandages, they do look a little bit too uniform on their own, so to rectify this, we'll need to take another similar sized piece of the bandage texture, and from that we can cut out a couple of strips that are 2 stripes wide, and around 5 or 6 thinner strips that are around 1 stripe wide. And there you go, that should be plenty. Right then, next we'll add some glue to the back of one of the larger strips, and we're going to try and glue that around the mummy, so that this strip is at a slightly different angle to the main texture. Hopefully you can see what I've done there, but basically something like this. So I'll just quickly do a similar thing a bit lower down, and there you go. Okay, so now I'll add some glue to one of the thinner pieces, and I'm going to try and glue this one so that it crosses over the top of the last piece at another slightly different angle. So I'll just make sure it's all stuck down, and hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do here. So I'll quickly do another one underneath, and there you go, and then it's just a simple matter of repeating the process for all of the other strips. And as you can see, as you start laying down just a few of these extra bandages, the whole thing really does start to look more and more realistic. So I'll just go ahead and finish things off by crisscrossing 2 more over the top of the head, like so. Then we'll just need to quickly make sure that everything is stuck down in all the right places, and when we're done, we should be left with a nice little mummy. Okay then, here's all of the pieces that we've made so far, and for this particular piece, I'm going to go with an open coffin with a mummy inside. So I'll just apply some hot glue to the back of the mummy itself, and glue that in the centre of the coffin, so that it looks something like this. And for the lid, I think I'm going to have it resting against the side. So I'll just add a spot of glue to the corner, and glue that in place as well. And there you go, there's the finished piece. But obviously, you don't have to put a mummy inside. For example, here's one that contains a skeleton, made from some of the bones that we made back in episode 12, and I think that works quite well. Anyway, here's the 2 with the lids in place that you saw earlier, and if you really want to go to town, you can also make little pieces of area terrain, like this one here, which you saw at the beginning of the video. Oh, and let's not forget that the burial shrouds, they're also part of this PDF as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for another episode. As I say, my timing might be a bit off with this one, but I do like to use crypts and tombs in games of D&D, and that's what these are for. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.